In this moment, the population is not particularly readable, especially for large numbers. So let's create a function that formats the population and shows it properly to our users. This method returns a non-nullable string. Call it formatPopulation. As a parameter, add a nullable string called population. Now, let's say that you want to check the length of population and print it in the console. Just type print population.length. And you get an error. This is because there's another null safety rule you should be aware of. You cannot access any property on an object that's nullable, and this includes strings. In our example, we cannot access the length property of a nullable string, but the same would apply to the toString method of a nullable object, for example. And here you have several options. One is adding the question mark after population. What this means here is that if the population is not null, the expression will return the length of population, but if it is null, it will just return null without raising any error. This is just a shorter and cleaner way of performing a null check on an object before accessing its properties. Back to our code, instead of adding a question mark after population, add an exclamation mark. As you might remember, this is called the bang operator. It upgrades a nullable value to a non-nullable one. So, even if population may be null, you are telling Flutter that it will definitely never be null, and to treat it as such. So, the length property becomes accessible again, but as usual, you should really be sure that population will never be null here, otherwise you'll get a runtime error. Okay, truth be told, we don't really want to know the length of population, we only want to format it a bit better for our users, so just comment out or remove this line. Now, create a final variable called format, and call the numberFormat.compact constructor. This is taken from the Intel package that we already added in the pubspec.yaml and imported at the top of this file. Here we need to pass a locale. In this case, let's set it to N-US, which is United States English. Of course, feel free to add the locale where you are right now. Now add another final variable called number that will call the int.parse method taking our population. And here we are again. We cannot call parse over a nullable string. And the truth is, we cannot really be sure that population is not null. So we'd better not use the bang operator here, as this would raise an error. Inside the parentheses, on the parse method, we can use the null assign operator that you have seen in a previous episode. This will parse the population string, but if it's null, it will just parse a string containing 0. Okay, in order to complete this method, return the result of format.format passing the number. This will apply our formatting to the population variable. Now, we need to call the formatPopulation method from the list view item builder. Just set the population variable so that it takes the result of the call to formatPopulation, passing the population property of the country at the current index. Run the app. And as you can see now, the population is much easier to read for our users. There's one last thing I'd like to point out before moving on, and it's null behavior in generics. Open the countries.helper.dart file. In this moment, the countries list is non-nullable, and each country element in the list is non-nullable as well. Let's say you want to make the list nullable. Where would you put the question mark? Well, if you want to make the whole list nullable, so that countries itself can be null, you put the question mark at the end of the type, like this. Okay, this doesn't really make sense for our code, so let's remove the question mark. If you want to allow the list to contain null values, so that countries can contain both valid country object and null, just add a question mark near the internal type, in this case country. But again, that's not useful for this specific project, so let's remove it as well. Okay, there's one more tool you should be aware of when you want to port older apps to null safety. Let's have a look at it in the next episode.